reacting to the truth about slugging Dead by Daylight.
Oh boy, this one is gonna be rough. It's time to talk about slugging. Hello everyone, my name is Pally and I'm an OG 2016 DBD nerd who mains Trapper and Bill. And by that definition, I'm basically the generic pumpkin spice of Dead by Daylight, but that's okay. Now, before I get fully into this, let me extend an olive branch to everyone. I 100% agree.
Basically, what I saw in this, it's showing kind of how I've come to my conclusion as well. But yeah.
Being slugged is boring for survivors.
Because it isn't completely
Now,
blind.
even more so if you're a content creator. If you're slugged, it's just dead air. I acknowledge it sucks, but I want to try and dig deeper into the situation and maybe
I won't agree with everything with him.
Help people see slugging as more than just killers being toxic. Now listen, I'm not going to go into a long and detailed explanation about what slugging is. Slugging is the tactic of leaving survivors on the ground instead of hooking them. I know what it is, you know what it is, and what we both know is that it's been happening a lot more lately. And that's what I want to talk about in this video.
The soul, but also Nasdaq.
I consistently make the mistake of doom scrolling DVD Twitter, keeping
original
an eye on the DBD forums and the DBD subreddit.
You should never do that Twitter thing. I was doing that at one point. I don't do it anymore.
And it's all a big mistake. And I see a lot of people with a misunderstanding of what's actually going on with the whole slugging meta. I've done a lot of research. I've compiled a lot of information, a lot of useful data, and I've talked to a lot of different people.
So all this stuff is compiled and things like that. This is like in my head, like a lot of it. I just can't put it out there as, you know, this video does.
To get their perspectives.
It's, you know, it's had to like grab everything and show, like, you'll see what I mean.
For everyone. So maybe we can all understand each other just a little bit better.
It'll also give you a good understanding why the God build works so well and why this playstyle is so much more fun.
You've probably been slugged a lot lately, or at least it feels like you have, right? And that's what I want to talk about first. A lot of the time you'll see, for example, a streamer tweet that they got tunneled every game that day. And then you'll go back and watch their VOD and you'll see that they were actually tunneled once in the span of 5 or 6 hours. The reason for this is, when one really unfun or annoying thing happens, as humans, we psychologically have that overshadow the times where that thing's not happening.
I mean, it's more than that, obviously. It's kind of negative. We remember negative more than positive, sadly. It's just how we are. That's why news is usually bad news, etc., etc. It's more memorable, these events.
It happens to everyone, and it's normal.
It's how our mind is.
It's how our brains work, and to an extent, I do think that complaints about slugging are very much the same. And it looks like more because there's multiple people saying it. But these are different people out of tens of...
Oh, I can completely articulate why the slug build works properly, but there's one thing saying it and there's another showing, like this visually shows. And I know some people, with me just speaking, they won't completely get it. Some people won't. This shows it, like it makes it very, very obvious.
Thousands of people, but the overall percentage
because I don't
of this
do like
happening
fully
right
edited
now
videos.
is likely very, very low. However, I'm not here to gaslight you. What I will say is that percentage is not going to be low for long, because soon a lot of killers are going to start slugging, and survivors' lives, I predict, are about to become very...
What's interesting with this slugging thing is no one were talking about this too much. I'll have to look when this video is. I will after it. But if it's recent, and I think it is, I've started doing the God building things, and now all these people are talking about slugging. It's really strange. It's very coincidental timing.
The immediate reaction from the survivor community to slugging is that killers don't care about survivors' fun. They think killers are being toxic and that it's a skill issue on the killer's part because they apparently need to slug. And I can see how it can look that way, but let me add some context to this situation. Number one, it's not that killers don't care about survivors' fun. They just don't feel responsible for it anymore.
Exactly.
And I think this is a very important distinction.
Not even anymore. I never felt responsible for someone else's fun. That's ridiculous. But I would say if there is a gentleman's agreement with survivor and killer and they're both trying to make it fun for each other, I'd get it. But a lot of survivor content's all about bullying killers. That's not fun for the killer. So I never got it. It was like this double standards.
There's nothing wrong with that. Survivor or killer, if you disagree, let me ask you, and be honest with yourselves, really stop and think.
Yeah, I saw it in those videos. It happens a lot, man. Like, I'll do something and then it's weird. Like, I'm a person that a lot of people don't want to say the name of for some reason in the DVD community. But when I do kind of find something or do something, I don't know. I don't want to say this is just me, but it's coincidental as fuck that all of a sudden this is like a thing people are talking about.
Think about it.
You can't say it isn't.
When you queue up as survivor, how often do you go out of your way to make the game more fun for the killer? Are you gonna chill on gens? Are you gonna not pre-drop pallets? Are you gonna not blinded pallets? Are you gonna not use flashbangs, which currently have no counterplay at the time of recording this?
Yep, they don't.
Are you gonna not run to main building, which is notoriously the most annoying and boring place to chase a survivor?
Of course you don't.
Are you gonna not run exhaustion perks? Are you gonna put yourself in an intentional
See what I mean?
disadvantage for the sake of how much fun the killer may or may not be having? Of course not.
I'm a
I've never
trendsetter.
seen a
Possibly.
survivor do this, and you shouldn't have to. Number
Possibly.
two, they aren't trying to be toxic. Now, don't get it twisted. There are some players in the DBD community that exist to make their opponents' lives miserable, and that goes for both killers and survivors. We know they exist, and they're just miserable human beings.
Sadistic
they
people,
are
yeah.
definitely the minority. And number three,
It will.
it's got nothing to do with killers
I think sadistic people are all the minority, but I don't know what percentage it is.
needing to
There's
slug.
definitely quite a few.
Killers don't need to
10%
slug.
maybe.
And make no mistake, slugging isn't just some magical easy button. However, slugging is the smartest play at the moment in most pub games, and oftentimes simply more fun compared to the alternative. And don't worry, I will explain.
Yep.
Now I'll discuss the truth about slugging, why killers are doing it, and why slugging will become even more popular in the very near future. And then after all that, we'll try to figure out a solution. So, why are killers slugging? Well, let me share with you a couple of personal experiences that I've had recently. So the first scenario, I spawn in as Trapper as I do on Hawkins. Couldn't find anyone for the first 2 minutes. I didn't even have Corrupt for them to hide from. They just wanted to immerse. I eventually find a Claudette. She pre-drops every single pallet
yeah,
she runs
potentially
to. She uses an
upset. You might be right
exhaustion perk
with
to
that.
extend the
They don't know
chase at the very moment
consequence.
I
So
should have
I
caught her.
don't know if it's.
And then I finally get
Yeah,
her
there's a bit
after
more simple
overall
in
a
it.
boring chase. And at this point, I still haven't seen anyone else. So I face a wall, I pick up the Claudette, and a Kate runs into the room with light-footed and drops a flashbang inside my character model because of a bug with the flashbang perk. And even though I was facing a wall, that entire chase meant nothing because the Claudette got off my shoulders. I finished the match, I even won the match, and I moved on.
One thing what I've noticed with this guy, this is nothing to do with the thing, but the way he plays Trapper is very strange. He puts the traps at the
But that
I know this has nothing to do with it. It's something I noticed before. I completely forgot about it, and now I've remembered again. The way he's doing Trapper looks wrong.
off my shoulders.
Like,
I finished
tell me if I'm right or wrong, but putting the trap there means
the
that
match, I even won the
the
match.
survivor can put the pallet down and then slide over it, no? And he's a Trapper man. It's just weird that he's doing that. They don't work. They could just slide over.
I moved on. But that flashbang save stuck with me. There was nothing I could have done to counter it. I was already looking at a wall. It just
I
wasn't
completely
fun.
forgot
It felt
about that.
all
I've
the
just
effort
remembered
that I
now.
put in wasn't
He's
rewarded.
doing the wrong
The reward
traps
I should
on
have received
Trapper as
was
a Trapper man.
stolen from me. The second scenario takes place immediately after the previous game on Hawkins. Now, I don't typically slug because I like to go for traps, but the flashbang was still on my mind and I decided to give it a try. So both out of frustration and curiosity, I throw on Surge, Knockout, Mindbreaker, and Sloppy, which is a typical slugging build these days.
See, look at that.
Curiosity, I throw on Surge, Knockout, Mindbreaker, and Sloppy, which is a
That was the first God build iteration I created. I didn't see it anywhere else, but it's like a known thing for some reason. Was it like a known thing?
typical slugging build these days, and I spawn in on guard.
Like, I've changed Sloppy into Franklin's now because I think that does more. But, well, I mean, yeah, there you go. This thing.
Joy of all maps.
I don't
and
remember seeing it
immediately
much,
went
man.
to main building to do a bit of trap setup. And just as I was
I
leaving
really
main
don't
building,
like before I did the God build. I do not remember going against this.
hear one of my traps get disarmed, which made me
I
go
really
back
don't.
to main building, and I spotted an Ellen Ripley making a run for it. And despite her holding W across the map, I managed to down her at an LT by the parking lot in about 30 seconds. However, as soon as I took her down,
A typical
I noticed
slugging build.
two
Yeah,
survivors
yeah, I
nearby,
guess.
both armed with flashbangs.
Didn't really go
ready to
against people
ruin
slugging
my
much
hard
though,
work.
either.
What they didn't realize is that I
Like,
had
just today alone, I think I went against 3 or 4 people with at least Mindbreaker, right? I think one of them had Mindbreaker and it was like just whatever, and then the others were actually slug builds.
no intention of picking up their teammate. The rest of the match turned into an absolute slugging spree until all the survivors were down, and after that I hooked them. Some bled out during the chaos, and I ultimately secured a 4K. The thing is, Knockout did almost nothing here because these people, I'm pretty sure, were like at least a 3-man Swift, or simply knew exactly where to go to revive their teammates. I don't know. Sloppy and Surge were the only perks that gave me any real value in this match. Now let me tell you something, it felt good. Not to make survivors miserable, and believe me, I did. They had
about
plenty
that.
to say about it in the in-game chat, but it felt good to not have to stop chasing. The non-stop chase aspect of slugging is so much fun. It felt like a lot like the original 2v8 or Kind of like the anniversary event where you didn't have to pick up a survivor and carry him to a hook. You had more time. It also felt good to not have to worry about Scourge hook RNG or just hook RNG in general. It felt good to not have to worry about annoying flashbangs or flashlights or hook sabos or body blocking, all of that.
Yep.
It felt really good to not have to worry about gens popping in the background as I wasted my time picking up survivors and carrying them all the way to a hook. Now I promise
Literally everything
Slugging
outside,
isn't
right?
just some easy mode. It was not an easy game, especially as
No,
Trapper,
they don't have to
and
be
I
easy.
did a bunch more of these for the science, also as Trapper, and I had very similar results in some games, but I also lost some games too. And that's really what it's all about, right? It's about fun at the end of the day. I didn't care that I was winning or losing. I was actually just having more fun because it was nonstop chase. All the best parts of DBD were there front and center, and it was fun. And I felt like I was being rewarded for my pressure, which heavily contributes to the fun factor. And that's what it's all about. It's about having fun. But the question becomes, why is it so fun? Well, to answer that question, let's start by comparing the advantages to hooking versus the advantages to slugging. So what are the advantages to hooking versus slugging? Well, we'll go with the easy one. Number one, survivor uses up a hook state. Okay, that's good, that's solid. We like that. Number two, you get maximum pressure, but only on specific hooks on some maps. For example, upstairs in Ormond or a basement hook, but that's all RNG based. Number three, hook.
But that also depends if you're proxying. You don't really get much pressure if you're not proxying. But yeah, if you get like a choke point hook and proxy it, yeah.
Based perks activate, so like pop and pain res,
Potentially.
grin, dead man's, but wait, a lot of those
But they could
have
just
actually
regens when it
been
happens.
nerfed. A lot of people don't think they're worth running anymore, so we'll talk about that later too.
I don't know why they
Number four,
nerfed
you
them.
get marginally more blood points. Not a lot more, but marginally more compared to slugging. Number five, survivors will maybe have more fun? Question mark? I don't know. Number six, survivors won't berate you for slugging. And I have talked to a lot of people, and these are the only ones I could actually come up with that made sense. Now it's time for the contentious look at the advantages to
I'm not sure
slugging
yet, Hill. I
versus
can't
hooking,
remember,
and a
but
lot of
I'll
this
put all
might shock you
the
or
details
even
on.
maybe make you angry. I don't know. So number one, same pressure as when you hook a survivor. You literally get the same pressure. They have to go to that survivor. They have to get them up, unless they've got unbreakable. But if that's the only perk you got to worry about, who cares?
It's just someone it's interesting someone else getting it without me having to like tell them it. Do you get what I mean? Like someone actually has come to the same conclusion as me, and it's interesting to see.
Number two, no wasting
Usually
time.
when I listen to a lot of people in the DVD sphere, they're so detached from what I see, what I think. I don't really get it, but like it's interesting seeing someone like actually get it, you know.
Number three, not giving survivors a huge tell of your location. You know, that big.
And you'll notice like when people do kind of like, you know, get my way, you'll understand, especially when he's doing this tally, like it's so obvious that slugging's better than hooking currently.
Bubble when you hook someone for survivors. Number four, no 4%. Number five, no base kit borrow time. Number six, you avoid flashlights and flashbangs. Number seven, you avoid pallet saves and power struggle. Number eight, you avoid hook sabos completely. Number nine, you avoid the meta second chances survivors get after being unhooked.
Some of the best stuff, yeah.
Number 10, non-stop chases. This is the most fun part of the game. You just never have to stop chasing. Number 11, slug survivors can be used as bait. You can't really do that with hooked survivors because of the anti-cam. Number 12, you never have to worry about hook spawn RNG. Number 13, counters survivor oak offerings, which I've been seeing more and more lately for some reason. Number 14, the killer will usually have more fun. And number 15,
if you haven't tried it, you'll
just
see.
To be cheeky, survivors won't berate you for hooking. Now you might think this is a long list, but I could have listed every single off the hook second chance, and I didn't. I grouped them all into one entry. Oh, actually, there is one more thing. Slugging counters the give up on hook epidemic. Now the truth here is the only real downsides to slugging for the killer is you might deal with unbreakable and boon exponential. Maybe you'll get a little bit less blood points. That's pretty much it. But the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages. The advantages are you don't have to deal with any of that stuff that is, for all intents and purposes, boring to verse. It's boring.
Also, he hasn't mentioned how this build kind of works with it, or maybe he did, as I was looking away. The slowdown is way higher with knockout and things like this because of the information
and
on
the DBD community is a
But
community
he might have said it. He might have said
on
it.
voicing what's boring to go against. So we should all unite on the
But
fact
there's
that
just so many
things that
pluses.
are boring, And it's not just survivors that can find things boring.
The Adventure Slug gives you gen
In any
slowdown.
case, let's have a look at the perks that are countered either partially or
slow down
by
in
simply
general.
not hooking survivors. And when I say partial counter, I mean it's got effects outside of hook-based effects, but the hook-based...
Also, because I've created this build, so I know why I use everything. Bar Sloppy, though I know why I was using Sloppy, but I think Franklin's is better. Jolt. So gen defense in general right now is very shit. Very shit. But if you play with a slug build with Surge, Jolt, whatever it's called, it's actually quite legit gen defense. Like, you can get sometimes 2 to 3 procs within 20-30 seconds, which is 24% of total regression of every gen around that radius. So it can be 2 or 3 gens you're hitting 24% regression on. So that's why it's a really good synergy with it.
Effect is countered. So from the top of the list to the bottom, I think I got
Which
them
is
all.
insane compared
Aftercare,
to what things are like.
background player, blood rush, boil over.
So this is everything they get with hooks.
Breakout, camaraderie, dead hard,
If you hook
decisive
them.
strike, deliverance.
And this is what I'm on about when I'm talking about hooking survivors. It's starting to actually benefit them more than benefiting the actual killer, which is fucking weird.
Desperate measures, fast track, flashbang, flip flop.
And also a lot of the stuff where the killer does hook them has been nerfed massively, right? These things, you can see many of them which definitely have not been nerfed massively. Some of them are like top meta, like Dead Hard and DS. These are like the best perks in the game, and they get them if you hook them.
Kindred, leader.
I don't know why he's got flashbang. Oh wait, yeah. He's talking about if they actually can. Yeah,
No
that
one
makes
left
sense.
behind. Off the record. Power struggle.
Off the record, another meta.
Resilience. Resurgence. Sabotage.
Power
second
struggle,
wind,
flip flop.
Shoulder the burden.
I wonder if it
slippery
was flip
meat,
flop. Oh, I did put
spine
flip flop,
chill,
right.
Will make it and wicked. And you know what? I'll give it to you. A lot of these perks you will never see. A lot of them are very niche, right? So let's remove the ones you barely ever see from the list. And now let's highlight the ones that you see fairly frequently. And now let's highlight the perks in this list that are full on meta and appear in nearly every single game.
Yep.
One thing we need to keep in mind.
Resilience, I don't know about. Resilience you get by slugging. Because it's just being injured. But yeah, everything else.
Here is killers are doing this because it's fun. And part of what makes it fun is the fact that slugging just nullifies a lot of the stuff that is boring to verse. A lot of people will say really silly stuff like, well, just don't tunnel. But if you play enough killer, you'll often find yourself getting hit with anti-tunnel perks more when you're not tunneling than when you actually are.
Yep.
Ask any content creator who plays a lot of killer how often an anti-tunnel perk is used as an offensive tactic instead of the intended purpose, which is to stop you from tunneling that survivor. It's not fun, and it can be simply avoided by not hooking.
And this is the bad design of, like, let's say DS, for example, or even off the record, I guess. If you're hooking too quickly, which should be a positive for the killer, these perks are anti-momentum, because the more people you have hooked, the more people who get off the hook, the more people who have DS or off the record active at the same time. So you have, like, you know, 2 people active with DS running around now because you've done well as killer. You're punished because you did well as killer. You see, I never liked that. I always thought DS should deactivate when you hook another person. Never did it though, did they?
Hooking the survivor while delivering nearly the same amount of pressure and also a less monotonous gameplay loop that just gives you nonstop chases. Now that's only part of the story, because most of these perks have been around for years and slugging has only gained a lot of traction recently.
Yeah,
so
why?
Let's look at more recent changes that behavior has made to DBD that have led up to this point. Let's start with number 1, the hook timer increase.
Yeah,
now it can
ridiculous.
be reasonably argued that this helps assist against camping, but the issue is the reasoning given was, well, it's only fair because we increased generator times. Of course, I'm paraphrasing, but that's the reason behavior gave. But what you need to understand is gen time and hook state time are not the same thing. There's only 1 killer and there's 4 survivors. It doesn't translate to the same impact or value.
No.
The extra time on hook is miles more impactful for survivors than the extra gen time is for killers. Because even if the killer isn't camping,
Forgot about the
that
hook
just removes
fucking
20 seconds of hook
extension as
pressure
well.
per
Okay.
survivor, which is about a quarter of a generator's progress, give or take a second or 2. And that doesn't seem like a lot, but when there's 4 survivors to a game, it is a lot. And the point of hooking survivors is to force their teammates off the gens to make the save. That's literally...
The urgency of grabbing someone from a hook has got really, really low. I think that's probably why hooks feel a lot weaker now. If I remember correctly, weren't the hooks even quicker before? Weren't it like 30 seconds or something? That the urgency of grabbing them was... it was way higher. It's not really that high anymore, I feel like.
What hook pressure is. So this made hooking a lot less rewarding.
I don't know much about Dead by Daylight Mobile.
Such a huge amount of potential pressure. Now, number 2, and this will be a contentious one, but this is some of the most recent changes to happen to the game, and it's kind of where the spark for slugging really began. Multiple perks that would otherwise provide incentive and reward for taking the time to hook survivors have now been nerfed to the point where many consider them to not even be worth running anymore. Like,
why are the devs nerfing that shit? Like I've said before, the devs, and this is where I can kind of complain on things because it's React, right? The devs, they've listened. I don't know how they've done it. It's almost quite fascinating. But there's been people playing Survivor who have been going down because they're not good at Survivor. And because they've been going down quite consistently, the killers have been getting loads of worth out of their perks because they're playing bad with Survivor. And somehow they've made the devs be like, yeah, you're actually right. You going down really quickly, the killer shouldn't really get much for that. So they kept nerfing it. Like, and they've even said, actually, I think he says, and this was like, what the fuck, devs? Where they're saying that the killer's objective's easy. That's why they had to nerf it. Like, hooking is too easy. But it's just weird that they've made it where you can fuck up with Survivor over and over again and still not really be that punished anymore because of all the kind of crying about, oh, the killer, it's winning too much and, you know, I'm going down so quickly and the killer keeps winning. Why is this? You know, that kind of shit.
If you want to have fun and feel rewarded,
I think it says
your objective. Your objective, of course, being to eliminate the survivors. Dead Man Switch, Pop Goes the Weasel, Grim Embrace, and Scourge Hook Pain Resonance were all collectively nerfed in patch 8.0 with the release of the Dungeons & Dragons chapter. The reasons given by behavior for the nerfs to these perks were that apparently the earning requirement for them was, quote, too easy to achieve, and that the synergy between some of them was, quote, too effective. The issue with this is just flat out not true at higher level gameplay. What's the one thing all of these perks have in common?
Dude, at top level, it's impressive to like get one person. Like it's quite difficult, especially on different map RNG and all this kind of stuff. And then they say, oh, it's too easy to hook. Well, yeah, if they don't play well, but what happens if they're playing the same level?
Common. To get value from them, you have to chase, hit, chase more, down, pick up, and hope there's no flashbangs, carry the survivor to a hook, and hook them before you get any value from them. That's a lot of steps, and a lot of the time wasted with a reward that just keeps getting smaller and less worth the time it takes. Especially if you think about the fact that survivors have had many gen progression perks that make gens go faster, either buffed or introduced in the last year, all at the same time that the gen regression is getting nerfed. It's a little weird, right?
Strange as fuck.
Gens are not only going faster, but the rewards for gen regression is much, much lower. Now you might be thinking, well, what about Nurse? What about Billy? What about Blight? What about Dracula? What about Spirit and all the other S tier and A tier killers that make these perks really, really effective? And you have a point. The problem with that is, what about the other 80% of the killer roster? You see, and therein lies the problem with killers like Nurse, Billy, Blight, you know, all these top tier killers, because if you...
They do have more flexibility, but it doesn't change the fact that they're nerfing these perks which are incentivizing a play style apparently people want. I mean, I can go on to why they're making the game about kills instead of hooks, you know, and balancing around hooks, but you know, it's the same kind of song and dance, isn't it? It's just a different
lot of these perks just
side of it,
not really worth
or
it
different
for the
kind
ones
of
below
perspective,
them, because they can't
or
get
angle,
the same
different
value
angle
from them that the top tier killers can. Now remember, these nerfs all happened in one patch, and very soon after that, slugging very slowly started to gain traction, and now we're at a point where it's getting very, very common. And only now is it becoming something that is pushing its way into the meta. Many of us predicted this a while ago. As soon as perks that incentivized hooking survivors started getting nerfed, many of us with experience said this would lead to slugging, much like the perks that incentivized going for separate survivors being nerfed led to more tunneling. A prime example of that was barbecue and chili having its blood point stacks removed. Tunneling notably shot up back then because this perk that everyone used that incentivized a non-tunneling playstyle at its core for a huge reward was just not worth the perk slot for most killers anymore if you didn't have mobility. The only perks killers have now that give any...
You can't rely on a perk incentivizing a healthy playstyle just based on blood points, because when people have enough blood points, then it's not incentivized. You need a gameplay loop which is healthily incentivized. I keep saying that. It's the gameplay loop.
Real tangible value versus the time and risks involved just to pick up and hook survivors.
Like the devs are the puppet masters. I keep saying like how survivors and killers go at each other. It's the devs. They're the ones in control. Like, we are playing their game. So if they incentivize the killer to do something and the killer's like, oh, this feels good doing this, and then by the killer doing that, it's the best possible gameplay loop for the survivors and vice versa, then it works, right? And then we won't be at each other's throats, etc. But they incentivize like such bad play styles consistently, right? So it's the devs at the end of the day. The devs create all this.
Are things like Gift of Pain.
We just try and make the game more fun.
Or Floods of Rage, but with Scourge Hook RNG being the dumpster fire it is.
Which indirectly usually hurts the other side.
They're really only useful with the help of the new Scourge Hook perk, Jagged Compass. But people are already complaining about that, and we know where that usually leads. So what is
My
the
God, all they bitching about Jagged Compass now.
If you look at the vocal people on Twitter or Reddit or any other place, you'll see the knee-jerk reaction is to demand a base kit unbreakable of some sort. However, as fun as you think that may be, do you really think it's healthy to keep handing out base kit second chances? Again, I know being slugged is boring, and the knee-jerk reaction is going to be, yes, base kit unbreakable. But at the end of the day, if the survivor is on the ground, that does mean they were outplayed.
Yeah.
And the entire reason this is happening in the
bingo, I ain't seen this part. Bingo.
First place is because hooking survivors isn't rewarding like slugging is.
Yeah.
And the more you take away things that make killer feel rewarding, the longer your queue.
Like, I've legit said, if you hook someone, like if they make it where you hook a fresh survivor, right? A completely fresh survivor, you haven't hooked them before, and there's like a map-wide regression of the gens by X% at base, just that idea will de-incentivize slugging over it, because now you're getting more worth from hooking, you see? Like, just something like that would be enough, but they just don't. They're just like, no, you know what? What we'll do, instead of incentivizing healthy play, we'll de-incentivize you doing this strategy you found, you know, the slugging strategy. We'll decentivize it. So what we'll do is we'll just put everyone unbreakable at base. Now everyone gets up forever. Like, yeah, but you know, you're creating even more issues. Like, how many handholds do you need to give the survivor's behavior before you realize that the gameplay loop is the issue and you should be incentivizing healthier gameplay instead of all these plaster fixers and turn the survivors into complete like gods because of all these like kind of, oh, the killer's found this angle to, have more fun. Subjective, but, you know, a lot of people have more fun that way. So, or we'll put this on and we'll put this on, we'll put this on. It's getting really ridiculous. It's getting ridiculous. Imagine unbreakable at base. Imagine if that is their solution, unbreakable at base. So unbreakable at base, for time at base. Fucking hell. Like, what are you doing at that point with killer? Like, you down them, but you don't get much for it. But then you hook them, but you don't get much for it. Actually, they get more for it for you hooking them. So you outplaying them, downing them, you lose, and hooking them, you lose. So, like, where's the benefit for you, right? Do we just need to hope that we go against really bad survivors all the time? Like, never actually go against people our own level and have, like, an interesting match?
Times we'll get.
Like, what are they actually aiming for?
I think the solution here, rather than punishing killers for slugging and rewarding survivors for being slugged...
Killer's fine, because I go against survivors who play like shit and win them. Yeah, but what about when they're good? You don't verse that much. Oh, okay.
Or even more confusing, rewarding killers for slugging by not
oh, there you go.
Them.
There you go. That's what I mean with that thing, with the pallet.
Rewarding killers for not slugging by not punishing them.
He got there in time, though. But yeah, there you go. They could just jump over it.
I think the best course of action is to practice a little bit of positive reinforcement. It's been proven to work in the past. Let's give killers a reason to hook survivors again. That doesn't make it seem like it's to their detriment.
What's sad about this is I said this 2-3 years ago at this point. It's just been like this really slow snowball, like growing and growing and growing insidiously, like behind the scenes, isn't it?
Currently is. And I'm not just talking about a blood point bonus because I don't even think that's enough
No,
anymore.
blood point
I think
doesn't
it needs
do
to be
it.
met with some sort of understanding on the part of survivors as well. For example, was Pop and Pain Res powerful? Of course.
Yep.
But did it reward hooking?
Yep.
Absolutely. Now, it's not...
Make it where pain res. I mean, it should be a base thing. You shouldn't need perks. That's another issue Behavior keep doing. They're forcing Killer to have to use certain perks so they can't experiment with other things and have more variety in the builds. You can say that with Survivor, but a lot of Survivor's perks are more... What would I say? They try to counter the killer's next meta or the killer's next playstyle, right? But if you make it where the killer's playstyle is going for hooks, then they will be able to mess around with more stuff, especially there's no tunneling, no camping, right? So it might actually fix both sides. If you make it where there's some really good gem regression from the survivor, from the killer side, it'll make it so there's more variety in the killer build. The killers will go for more hooks. Like if you actually do fresh hooks and it's a big regression, you get really big worth from going for fresh hooks. It's going to make it where survivors aren't getting tunneled and slugged as much, and then survivor will change their perks because they're not getting as much use out of DS, for example, out of off the record, because now killers are actually going for more fresh hooks, you see? So it might actually fix both metas. But again, I've said this years ago. Like, this isn't a new thing I'm saying. I'm regurgitating, but it's a react to this, and it's a perfect, opportunity to talk about what I've talked about for fucking years.
Necessarily about reverting
I said eventually people will start to get it. I just don't know when.
The changes made to these perks, but
going on 3 years at this point.
Being more understanding
Maybe soon.
of why killers use some things and why those things actually contribute to a healthier gameplay loop, and that there's more purpose behind those things than to just slow down generators. And of course, at the end of the day, maybe having that little bit of extra forethought before deciding something should be nerfed and immediately going to Twitter to demand said nerf. Catching
that one never
survivors in a
happened. They're
chase,
too emotional.
while map dependent, isn't always the most time efficient process. Of course, it varies by killer and whether they have anti-loop and other factors, but even some of the most known and beloved creators out there have gone on record saying that with things like exhaustion perks and windows of opportunity and other things at play, even what would normally be considered a mediocre survivor can lead a decently long chase if they just pre-drop pallets or run around main building with...
This isn't an issue with Windows. This is an issue with loop design. I don't know how people still get confused by that. People say Windows is so strong. It's not Windows, it's the loops. The loops are too strong. Make it so the loops can be won, and then Windows doesn't matter, does it? Because now they have to actually play the loop.
Which, sadly, many survivors do anyway.
Best Green, really appreciate the follow.
Like
Good on, appreciate the sub on YouTube, appreciate
that,
man.
Now you have to spend time risk picking them up, carrying them to a hook.
Blues as well with the follow.
No mistake, I'm not saying it's hard. Most chases are about running out the clock, not necessarily about difficulty. But time is always against the killer, so this raises the question, how can we reward hooking in a way that matches the effort required to actually do it?
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Now, I'll probably get a lot of pushback for this, but many believe what it will take is for survivors to be a little more introspective with themselves and realize that yes, while things like Pop and Pain Res, Deadmans, and Grim were powerful, they accomplish more than just gen slowdown. Perks like that made hooking survivors worth it for the killer. It made hooking survivors feel rewarding. Would you rather be slugged every game, or would you rather have an interactive game? What was worse, Pop and Pain Res, or being slugged repeatedly until your entire team was down? It may also be wise to maybe think if maybe, just maybe, survivors have been given too many perks that just offer them a second chance for getting off the hook.
Like
Many
Terminators.
of them tend to wave them in the killer's face, or use their anti-tunnel as an offensive tactic, just to have another one to bail them out when the killer punishes them for that. I can't tell you how many times I've been hit by a DS when I'm not even tunneling, or how many times I've had someone with
Oh, no, Nightbot.
run across the map from where they were unhooked, body block a door fully healed as I chased their teammate just to DS me when I downed them. Anti-tunnel, by the way. That kind of stuff isn't fun, or rather, that kind of stuff is boring to go against.
Anti-momentum, I call it.
Killer players are trying to have fun, just like you. Most aren't against survivors having fun. Killer players just want survivors to match the same kind of energy that they expect from them. Many killers would go back to hooking survivors if they were rewarded for it in the course of
100%.
gameplay.
Yeah. I slug because it rewards me more than hooking. I will hook if it rewards me more than slugging. This should be common sense. Behavior just don't get this shit. They just don't get it. But it's the same company that don't understand, that MMR should be linked to something, so there's a reward for it. They don't get that either. Like, there's a lot of things they don't get.
Evidenced by the fact that the slugging meta has only really come into effect now and not before. And this will likely get me
Still think that's too close. I still think they'll be able to put that down.
Even more hate, but the only thing I know isn't the solution is to give survivors another base kit second chance to fix this. Even Spooky Loop said it, that they should just have a faster bleed out button. If you really wanted a quick and dirty fix, that's what you would do. If the problem really is that it's too...
No, that's not a good idea. These fucking people are so shit ideas. Yeah, what you should do is, you know how they kill themselves on Hook, and everyone really likes that? Yeah, they should kill themselves on Floor as well. Yeah, very good idea.
Boring to spend all that time on the ground, then that should be an adequate fix. But I think that's just another band-aid.
That can be dropped as well.
What really needs to happen is behavior needs to find a
They keep putting these traps in places where 100% they could be dropped. I'm sure of it.
way to make hooking survivors advantageous and rewarding again for killers, because positive reinforcement goes a long way. Honestly, at the end of the day, the only ones we can really lay the blame on here, respectfully, is Behavior Interactive.
Yeah,
It could be argued
the
that in
devs.
their efforts to listen to the community, they maybe listen to them a bit too much, or maybe they do what I do and spend way too much time doom scrolling Twitter and Reddit and sometimes take it way too seriously. Either way, my hope, which will probably go unfulfilled, is that someone at Behavior Interactive sees this, because at the time of recording this, the most recent player satisfaction survey dedicated a bunch of questions to asking about slugging at the very end of it.
Yeah.
And none of them were from the killer's perspective.
Nope.
It was all entirely from the survivor's perspective and how they felt about slugging.
Yep.
And that's extremely worrying, because it appears that they aren't looking at why killers are slugging,
They
but rather just
don't.
how survivors feel.
They don't. They see a tap running, and instead of trying to figure out how to turn the tap off, they put buckets underneath to catch the water. That's how they do it. They've always done it that way. They plaster fix on top of plaster fixers on top of plaster fixers, instead of just turning the tap off, the root of the issue. They just don't do it.
Feel about it. And that's terrible, because there's two sides to every story and everything happens for a reason. But anyway, that's it for this video. If there was anything I wish you would take away from this video, it's that everyone, killers and survivors alike, should try to better understand each other, understand their opponents. A little understanding, a little empathy, and a little conversation goes a long way. Don't be so quick to attack each other. Don't be so quick to assume we're trying to make each other miserable. If you want to see me live the hard life of a
Alright. Interesting. But yeah, I wanted to react to that with you guys and give a bit of my takes as well. But it's interesting to see that people are starting to kind of realize. It does make me a bit sad, because I've tried to be proactive. Like before MMR, whenever MMR was introduced into this game, I would say like 2 or 3 months before that is when I started understanding the direction that it's going. I knew it would go into kills, and then you're going to figure out what's the most efficient way of killing. The most efficient way of killing was hooks, but camping, and now it's starting to be slugs. A lot of it revolves around not balancing around hook states, and not incentivizing hooks. I've said this for a very, very long time. I'm not saying it when streaming anymore, because you've already heard this shit, but when we're reacting to something, why not, right? So, good. Yeah, it was good. I, obviously agree with many different things. Hope you like that little react. Remember to subscribe.